Hi, Brian and Simone. Thank you so much for making time to talk with us today. We'd like to hear a little bit about why you guys are both running for Portland City Auditor. And Brian, would you mind starting us off and telling us a little bit about who you are and why you're running?
Yeah, it'd be great to. Thanks for having me today and having us and having this conversation. I'm running for Portland Auditor because, first of all, I was approached by folks when it didn't look like anybody was going to be running. I have the background and credentials. I looked into it. I wasn't considering this at Thanksgiving time. But when I looked into the city's needs and what I bring to the table, I thought this would be a great way to serve my city. I think we all know Portland's off track, and my goal is to help get us back on track. Like I said, I'm bringing my expertise as a certified public accountant, my experience, 35 years working in the private sector, public sector, and with non-NGO, non-profit sector to the table. My progressive values and my commitment to this city. I want to make sure we address important issues like homelessness, affordability, and public safety. And I'm looking to bring a fresh, independent perspective to this office. I think that's important. A few quick things about myself. We can go more into it. I was going to just a couple more minutes about myself. Or
Sure.
Okay. So like I said, I've been an Oregon CPA for 30 years. I have audit experience with the Washington State Department of Revenue as an internal auditor, and then also 2 jobs as auditors with big 8 international accounting firms. I have business experience. I've started a couple companies. I sit on the board of, and I've sat on the board of many NGOs, non-government, nonprofits, excuse me. Currently on the board at KVU Community Radio, where I'm on the executive committee. And I'm also a founding board member of Livelihood Northwest. Livelihood Northwest is an economic development organization that serves about 400 businesses here in Portland each year, entrepreneurs. And I'm really proud to say that 78% of those businesses are led by people of color and 70% by women. I also have an MBA in sustainable business. And I'm independent of the city government, the city council, and what's going on there. And I'm really looking to bring that independence and outside perspective to what's going on in City Hall and help us do a better job and back on track.
Great, thank you very much. And Simone, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for auditor?
Sure. Good afternoon. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today and to ask for your endorsement. My name is Simone Reddy, and I'm an Oregonian. I was born in Salem and raised in Portland. I grew up and I currently live in Northeast. I was schooled by our region's public institutions as a student, parent, and public servant. And I'm running for city auditor because Portlanders have questions and they want answers about how their government is working. I've spent my entire career asking and answering questions of public interest. And it's very well known that Portlanders are not happy with current conditions regarding homelessness, public safety, and equity. And the auditor's office is uniquely positioned to make government more accountable and accessible to the public. Portlanders deserve an open and accountable government that is responsive to community needs and ensures that the benefits of economic growth are shared equitably. I also want to inspire the next generation of Portlanders to help solve our city's most complex problems. I believe that my experience, my values, and my breadth of community support show that I'm ready to hold city government accountable from day one. I'm the right person for this job because I've been serving its residents throughout my life as an artist, advocate, and auditor, and I bring 15 years of public service experience to the position. Portland has a really long tradition of performance auditing, which looks beyond how government resources are accounted for and into how effectively and efficiently they're being used. And I'm prepared to uphold that position. I bring nearly a decade of progressively responsible performance audit experience to the office. During that time, I've applied my outreach and analysis skills to performance audits of the Oregon Zoo, our childcare system, TriMet, and the region's affordable housing bond. Before I became an auditor, I worked with youth and families in the Portland area to help them prepare for life after high school. I hold the Certified Internal Auditor designation, which is the highest designation that performance auditors like me can earn. I'm also a certified government auditing professional, which demonstrates my knowledge of audit standards and governance in the public sector, as well as the more unique aspects of auditing in government, including the issue of equity in service provision. I have a master's degree in public policy and a bachelor's degree in urban studies. And my academic background has equipped me in the art and science of performance auditing and the particular challenges facing our cities. I also have the right values for the job. I'm committed to upholding the office's independence so that its work remains credible. I'm dedicated to public service, which means ensuring that government resources are serving those who need them most. And I also value inclusion. I know that government works best when diverse voices are heard. And that means communicating audit results in ways that make the public want to be involved and understand how their city works. I also bring broad community support, not just during the life of this campaign, but throughout my career. I was the first candidate to qualify for matching funds under the Small Donor Elections Program. And I reached that milestone organically through the support of my friends and family and mentors. My endorsements are broad. They include organizations ranging from the Northwest Carpenters Union to the Portland Business Alliance. I have the support of certified audit professionals, including elected leaders like former city, county, and state auditor Gary Blackmer, who hired me into this profession. I also bring support from community leaders, including a former city commissioner who served 3 terms with 3 different auditors.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's first start off with audits. Are there specific audits, and Simone, why don't you start off on this question? Are there specific audits that you have in mind that you think you would aim to get done if elected to this position?
Yes, I think you know, the qualities or criteria that I would use to select audits would really be based on incorporating more public input into the considerations that we make and where we use our audit resources. I think undeniably an area of public concern is how the city is responding to the homelessness crisis. And that's one that I think can be addressed from many different angles. It's one that I have experience working on through my work at Metro, looking at their regional affordable housing bond early in the process before money was going out the door to see that systems were in place. And now that the city is leaning away, or not away, but looking into how to address the service side of the homelessness crisis, I think it's really important that we have credible data to make sure that solutions are well targeted and also achieving the intended outcomes.
Great, thank you. Brian, same question for you. Are there specific audits that would be on your list?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think it's really important to get into the office and to look and see what's in the pipeline, what's been done. And between now and when we would take office in January, there's going to be new things that come up and new priorities. The first thing I plan to do is to meet with the audit staff and to find out what their recommendations are. And between now and then, to continue to meet with community groups and citizens and to hear what they think need to be looked at. I definitely am going to look into homelessness issues, affordability issues, housing issues, because those are the ones that right now, and public safety issues that are critical to Portlanders and are feeling good about this community and how we can help get back on track. I just also want to dispute something that Simone said. Simone, I would dispute that the internal auditor is the top credential for this position. I think the CPA credential is the top credential, and I just there's a few other things I would take issue with you said, but I just want to bring that up.
Thank you. So Brian, if you can go first on this question. The auditor's office includes many more divisions beyond just audits. Are there any areas that you think need additional attention, and what would you look to focus on?
Good question. I think that the reporting, the ability of people to feel comfortable about reporting fraud, waste, and abuse, and a hotline for employees, especially there's a hotline for people outside of the city, but there also ought to be a reporting mechanism for people inside the city to report problems and to have like what every business I've ever been in, I've helped implement a suggestion box if there hasn't been in one, because I think the best recommendations are really going to come from people who are doing the frontline work.
Okay, and so I'm sorry, I'm not sure I quite heard. So you were saying just in terms of creating a new hotline for employees, or making sure that employees are able to be using that?
Make sure that there's ways that the employees can. I'm not sure if the audit waste and abuse hotline is something that employees are able to access and report through and use. That those mechanisms ought to be set up. I also want to assess what information is not being made available to the public that needs to be made available to the public. And I look for better ways to get the information from audits out to the public so that they're better understanding what's going on with the city government.
Okay, great, thank you. And Simone, same question for you. Are there priorities outside of the audits division that you would look to focus on if you became auditor?
Yeah, I appreciate that question because much of this campaign has been about informing the public of what the auditor does. The City of Portland Auditor is responsible for accountability and transparency. So that includes, conducting audits and investigations, but also making sure that the public has access to its institution. That entails managing records and archives, as well as overseeing city elections. And I think what I'd like to see is more access to the community, both in terms of deciding how we spend our audit priorities, so gathering input from the public early on so that they can inform what's guiding our work. And that also applies, I think, to the archives division. The city residents need to see their history reflected in their work and be able to access it for their causes. So I think really promoting accessibility. And as far as elections, I think that's also an area that could improve in terms of how clearly we're communicating how things work, like how to run for office and rules around campaign finance. So I really believe in more education for the public so that they can be more engaged throughout the audit process and being civic involved in general.
Okay, thank you. Simone?
You mentioned transparency, so I just want to jump in. I have a bit of a interest in public records, and so Simone, for you first, and then Brian, I am curious as to whether you support the current public records law, which allows for drafts of audits to be public record after the audit is issued. Do you support that going forward?
It's my understanding that that has been the case. And that's been something that the audits division at the state where I worked has dealt with, as well as at Metro. We design our policies in the auditor's office to make sure that folks on both sides, so the audited programs as well as those conducting the audits, are well aware of those rules. And I think it's really important for the public to be able to have access and understanding of the audit process so that they know what evidence is driving our conclusions. I believe that I wouldn't change the way it's working now. I think it's important to have productive working relationships with those on the other side of the audit and also those outside the city so that they share an understanding of how that process works and can trust that it's delivering credible results.
Thank you. Brian, same question to you. It used to be that drafts were public record as audits were ongoing. Now drafts are public record after the audit is complete and issued. Are you in favor of keeping the current system where previous drafts of the audit are public record?
I haven't really thought about it much. I appreciate that they're part of the public record, and I think they should be. I'm not sure if it should be that the drafts are. As I understand it, the differences between the process that the drafts were made public records as they were drafted versus now they're made public at the conclusion.
Correct. So the public can look back and see changes that were
Yeah,
made.
and I think that's important to see that. I really probably support it at the end. I think it's a process of getting to the final conclusion, and part of that process is communication, and it's a process. And the final draft needs to stand on its own. And I know that the city recently had a report that had gone through some serious changes, and there was questions about it. And at the end of the day, the auditor needs to be able to stand up and support why they came to the final conclusion and not to these earlier ones. And I think that is part of the process. So I really do think it's probably best at the end, and that they're transparent with how they went through these things, how they went through the changes. And I think one of the reasons that an independent person such as myself is important is that I'm not being, what kind of influence is happening in that process. And as I'm running somebody who's independent of the government body, these institutions, previous auditors, and the city council and mayor. I think that's an important attribute for the city at this time.
Thank you.
So that is a perfect segue into the question that I had. Brian, I'll start with you. It's a fairly lengthy question, so I'll say it and I can say it again for you, Simone, once Brian has answered. I'd like to talk a little bit about that recent city audit. I think that you were mentioning, Brian, on the Portland Clean Energy Fund. I'll give a brief overview. As the current auditor had launched that audit several years ago, the original audit was highly critical, even calling for a pause in distributing dollars so the program could set better benchmarks and accountability standards. Well, that audit generated a lot of blowback from the program's leaders. And in response, the current auditor put the original audit on hold and spent 8 months working with the program, toning down the language and reworking recommendations, which included eliminating that pause. So I have two questions for you, Brian. Do you think it was appropriate to allow the program's leaders to influence the final outcome to the extent that it did? And do you think that program's distribution of public dollars should be paused?
Well, I don't have as much insight as probably you do. I read about it in the paper, and I do think that it's appropriate. What's the goal here? What's the overall objective? We're, as a city auditor, we're working for the city. We're doing the people's business, being a watchdog. But at the end of the day, the city's got things that it's trying to accomplish. And that was a law passed to improve energy efficiency, get money out to diverse communities, and kind of a little green new deal, I think, a little bit in some ways here in Portland. And I think that when we look at the objective, I think that I don't know that it would have been served by shutting it down. And I really do think that the process that happened and that went through was somewhat reasonable, which is, I think, as I understood it, the first draft of the report was overly harsh. And when I've been an auditor in the past, you come to findings, you come to conclusions, and then you work with who you're auditing to, is this accurate? Is this the best thing? And in this case with the city, I think the approach was, it doesn't have maybe the best optics, but that's the reality of, like, is anybody served by shutting it down? Are we achieving the goals that voters voted on and passed and expect? And but at the same time, as I understand, the audit report did have recommendations, did shine a light on what's going on. And part of the process of auditing, I think one of the things I'd like to see more of when I look at the audit process is, in management, there's a thing called the Deming cycle, which is plan, do, check, act. It's a cycle for continuous improvement. And I think the auditor is the check part in that process. So we've been planning, they've implemented something, we're now checking it. And then where's the follow-up on the act? That I don't know that we're doing a good job of that. And then that cycle should be repeated again, plan, do, check, act, for continuous improvement. And I think those are areas where our city overall needs to do better. The auditor's doing the check part. Now it's that next thing of taking that information, acting upon it, and then repeating that cycle again, planning to do something differently, doing it, checking it, acting on it. And that's how you get continuous improvement. And when I look at some of these audit reports going back to things that have been recommended in 2004 and then 2012, and then the problems still happening in 2021, something's definitely breaking down in the city that we need to do a better job at. We just don't have the luxury of wasting time and effort like that.
Laura, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm really bad about that. Thank you, Brian. Simone, would you like me to read that question again for you?
Yes, please.
Great. So I had just hoped to talk about the city audit that we wrote about recently of the Portland Clean Energy Fund. The current auditor launched it several years ago. The original audit was highly critical of the program, even calling for a pause. I just want to clarify here, it wasn't a shutdown, but a pause in distributing dollars so the program could set better benchmarks and accountability standards. That audit, of course, generated a lot of blowback from the program's leaders. And in response, the current auditor put the audit on hold and spent 8 months working with the program, toning down the language, ultimately reworking the recommendations and eliminating that pause as one of the recommendations. So I'm curious, Simone, do you think it was appropriate to allow the program's leaders to influence the final outcomes to the extent that it did? And do you think the program's distribution should be paused?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think the reporting that's been done on that process has really shed a light for the public and hopefully for the media as well, in terms of the rigor of quality control that goes into the auditing process. Allowing management or the program under audit to respond to the findings before they are made public is part of any good audit. It's part of our government auditing standards. I think that in terms of the amount of influence, it would be hard to judge unless I was, reconciling each draft along with what the requested changes were. But I think, auditors have discretion to present the evidence that they're using to draw their conclusions. And the audited agency also has a chance to comment on those so that the result is a fair and accurate report. Just like reporters, we strive for balance and fairness in our reporting. As far as the program being paused, to me, I guess to go to the metaphor that Brian mentioned, the plan, do, check, and act, I would really be cautious of issuing a recommendation that a program be stopped, because I feel like that is really the work of management and other leaders in the city to decide how resources are used. The auditor's role is really just to inform improvements and hold programs accountable to the aims that they are trying to achieve. And that includes having an effective system of performance measurement, which was, I believe, really the key message of that audit.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Simone, then this question goes to you. It's now become clear that we are years away from a workable police oversight commission as envisioned by the 2020 measure that passed. As a result, the auditor's office is now preparing to hand over responsibility for managing the independent police review division over to City Council. Do you agree with that decision? And is there anything that you would have done differently?
Thanks for raising this issue. I think it's been one of the hardest to have a position on because of it being such a moving target. Just to clarify, the incumbent has decided to hand over that transition to City Council, and it will be in the city's hands as of July 1st. That's well before the next auditor takes the position. I think it's been an incredibly hard position for an elected auditor to be in. I myself, and I believe my opponent, have agreed with the changes in terms of the public calling for a new form of oversight for police accountability. And it's one that has more teeth. So it has potential to replace and improve upon the current system. I think there was widespread agreement that what is currently in place is not working. I think the auditor is in a tricky place because we are bound by government auditing standards, and that means that we don't want to have our hands on something that we are later going to evaluate. So it's been a very tricky role, I think, for the incumbent to navigate. And I think I would have challenges too, understanding exactly where can I add value, and also leaving enough distance so that I can bring a critical perspective to whatever is replacing IPR. I do believe that what's not changing is the auditor's authority to continue to conduct independent reviews and investigations of the police. I think the city auditor's office has done great work in that area, and that's something that I'm very enthusiastic and prepared to continue.
Just to follow up on that a little bit more, because what this action does is it really puts our existing system of police oversight in question until there is a new replacement. So, you know, giving this back to City Council, while it certainly insulates the auditor's office from having to manage a system that may be losing people or that's difficult to manage in the first place, is it a better move for City Council, for the good of the city? Is that a better move to put it with the City Council as opposed to the auditor's office trying to maintain it where it's been?
Well, I think the proposal to replace the current system, and the incumbent herself has spoken about how the current IPR is flawed. It does not have the authority to discipline officers, unlike the current system or the proposed system that's being developed. I also understand that the city charter allows the auditor to take on additional duties with her consent. And I think looking back through history, we might see that different auditors have taken different approaches when it comes to police oversight. I think what I would strive for is one that meets a system that meets high standards of independence, but also honors the concerns and the voices of the community. And so that's what I'd like to see in this next iteration, is a balance between those two perspectives, and a joining of wisdom between the technical experts and folks who are experiencing things on the streets.
Okay, just to make sure I have a clear answer on this, would you have, if this were in your hands, would you be doing the same thing, or would you seek to keep it within the auditor's office until the replacement is ready?
I think I would try to continue to hold on to it, because the auditor's office really does have unique authority and structure to remain independent. As tough as the choice was to let that go, I hope that the energy that I bring to this office would sustain me to see that course.
Okay, thank you. Brian, same question for you. We're years away from a replacement committee as envisioned by the police reform measure that passed in 2020. As a result, the city auditor's office is handing over responsibility for the independent police review to City Council as of July, as Simone noted. Is that a decision that you agree with, or is there something that you would have done differently?
Thanks. No, I don't agree with that decision. I think it's got to rest somewhere in the city, and I think the auditor's office would have probably been the best place for it to reside, given that the independence that we're looking for, that the citizens wanted, that I supported, I voted for it. It's tricky. It's a tricky place. It's a tricky institution, because, as Simone said, now, do we audit it? Are we responsible for auditing it and it being in our office? I hadn't really thought about that aspect of it before, but that's one thing that maybe for something like that we would end up bringing in somebody independent of our office if we couldn't do that audit. But I think the police accountability needs to be independent of the current city institutions and government, mayor's office, city councilors, because it's so important to bringing back trust in our police and oversight, so that public safety is available to all people in the city. I would have kept it here if possible. The fact that it's moving out of the city, out of the auditor's office, I'm just going to do my part if elected to make sure that process is done as well as it can be. and that we maintain police oversight in the interim until it's fully up and running, and just do the best I can to implement the will of the voters.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Brian, this question's for you. In recent years, the auditor's office has sought greater independence to run the office. Are there any additional changes that you would seek in the structure or in the auditor's authority?
The main thing that I've really thought about when I've heard about these problems is that I'd love to see the auditor's budget be something that maybe put into the code and independent of any political process. I think that when I looked at private companies have internal auditors. That's something akin to what we're doing here. And I think setting a percentage might be the best way to set the budget so it isn't a political football. That's one of the things I'd like to explore more.
And Simone, same question for you. Are there any changes that you would seek to make to the auditor's office, either in structure or authority?
At this time, I don't have a vision for particular changes. I want to learn more about what is working and what needs improvement before I go and make proposals. I'm intrigued by what my opponent said about having a fixed percentage of the budget dedicated to audit resources, because I think that's something that local government auditors strive for across the country, is having a commensurate budget when it comes to staffing and resources to do audits versus the level of resources that a city or any other government has to do its job. So I'm curious to know where that's been modeled, because I'm compelled by it.
I gotta say, I just assume Simone would probably agree with this. I think money spent on internal audits and on this performance auditing is money well spent. And obviously we can't have an unlimited budget, but it would be nice to have a fixed budget so that we can know what we're working with and that it's commensurate for the size of the city's budget.
Okay, and I'm sorry, Brian, sometimes the audio is still a little bit rough. Was there somewhere specific where you've seen that?
Well, I when I first got involved and was looking at the lack of independence when it came down to the budget, was what do corporations spend on internal audits? And it's a range. It's not codified anywhere, but it seemed to me that range would be applicable also to the city, and that we figure out a level and we put it in the city budget. Maybe it's 0.35%, 0.5%, somewhere in that range, and that then it takes it out of the political realm. It's just set. But I do believe that whatever we spend in the internal audit is money well spent, that we get a return on the investment. We ought to be getting a return on investment from these audits, performance audits, so that we do a better job with spending our money and reforming programs and doing that plan, do, check, act cycle that I talked about, and for continuous improvement.
Great, thank you. Simone, both you and Brian, I believe, are using the small donor contribution program to fund your campaigns. It's not currently housed under the city auditor's office. Do you think it is appropriate to move it to the city auditor's office? And if so, should the auditor then or auditor candidates be partaking of that system?
Is that for me to answer first?
Sorry, yes.
Okay. So yes, there's an important distinction to make, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying about improving the quality of information available to the public about city programs. There's been a lot of confusion about the difference between small donor elections, which is the new term to refer to open and accountable elections, which is a very new program for the city, and then honest elections, which is the set of regulations that the auditor enforces when it comes to city elections. I think, for the reasons that I discussed earlier about independence, that because that program is new, I think it's really important that it be subject to audit. And if it were within the auditor's office, it would be very hard for the auditor to provide an objective opinion about it and to inform constructive improvements. I can see because of the financial risk, it is a matching program. It requires a high level of scrutiny, and I really wouldn't want to sacrifice that by creating any barriers for the auditor's office to evaluate it thoroughly.
For at least for now, you would want to keep it separate from the auditor's office.
I would, as it matures. That's again going back to what I was saying about the Metro Auditor's Office audit of regional housing. We looked prospectively at the program, trying to identify risks before the program was implemented. I don't think that happened with the auditor's office getting a chance to look in, but I certainly think during its middle stage and as it continues to develop, it would be really important to have some objective results and opinions about how effectively the program is working.
Great, thank you. And Brian, same question for you. Do you think it'd be better to move the small donor elections program to the city auditor's office? And if so, would it be appropriate for auditor candidates to be participating in it?
I don't think it needs to be in the city auditor's office. And I think I probably wouldn't be running if it wasn't available. I think it's a great program. I think it's a healthy improvement to our democracy to get big money and big influences out of campaigns. I think it's well structured. I know that the way it's been administered for my campaign and seeing how they check, I know people have gotten postcards about did they make the donation. There's checks and balances. They're very thorough with what they're doing, because 5-10 years ago, the city got burned on a candidate who took a lot of money and was inappropriate with those funds, and it really left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. But what we want to do here is have fair, free elections and to get big money out of it. I think it's a great program, and I hope people learn more about it. I think it should be outside of the Portland or outside of the auditor's office, so that we don't have so that we can audit it and report on it.
Great, thank you. Brian, let me ask you about this. On your website, you say you support housing first and that's the best way to address homelessness. I'm wondering, do you think it's appropriate to advocate for specific policies? Or how is that consistent with the expectation that an auditor is objective and impartial?
I do think it's possible to advocate for solutions and still be objective and impartial. When the auditor is assessing what the city's doing, it's that check part. And the program, we don't design the program, we don't implement the program. They've done the plan and the do, and that now we're doing a check. And if it's working well and it's functioning, then let's do more of that. But if it's not, I think it's fine and appropriate for the auditor to provide recommendations for improvements.
But do you think that is, I guess the distinction I'm trying to draw is that there's kind of evaluating the success of a policy that's been adopted by the decision makers, by city council. And then they're saying this is the best policy, which I guess I'm wondering, do you think that would kind of, that should concern anyone, that it is very much, you're stating out front, you are a believer in housing first? Because that necessarily brings into question the balance of resources that's going to something like temporary shelter.
I think, one of the things as an auditor and as a CPA is about putting the public first. It's about independence. The cornerstone of my profession, my professional obligations are independence, objectivity, and integrity. And if I thought I wasn't independent, then I would have a program or something. We'll figure out some other way to look into it. I don't believe the fact that I have ideas or opinions about what might be a better policy or better approach is going to damage my independence, my integrity, or my objectivity. I'm not that committed to, I'm committed to these things. I believe in them, but it's not like, if what we're doing is working, then kudos. Well, let's do more of it. And if what we're doing isn't, the fact that I have beliefs about what might be a better approach, I'll just put those out there and people can evaluate them at that time.
Okay.
But again, I'm not the decision maker or the implementer of those decisions. That becomes somebody else's job.
Okay, thank you. And a slight variation of that question for you, Simone. Is it appropriate or can an auditor advocate for specific policies while acting objectively and independently?
I don't think she can advocate for policies and then audit the programs that are affected by those policies. There are certain, I think, administrative policies that the auditor within her purview may be able to adjust within her authority. But it's really important, and really part of the heart and soul of government auditing is making sure that there are safeguards in place to prevent any threats to an auditor's independence. And that includes having certain political convictions or policy positions regarding an issue that's under audit. Brian has used this metaphor of plan, do, check, and act. And so I'll use that to explain that the check part, it may not happen unless the auditor has an objective view about all the city resources at play. So when I hear things like, things are working well, I've had a positive experience, those are personal views, and those should not be used to influence the auditor's schedule. That should be based on data, including where resources are being spent, as well as how many, the degree of risk that programs might be posing to public safety, health, and equity.
Okay, thank you. Simone, this question's for you first. There is, as I'm sure you both are aware, huge dissatisfaction with city leadership at this point. One of the things that people say is concerned that criticisms brought forth in audits helps erode trust in government. I guess what would be your response to that, and how do you see the city auditor's office, should it play a role at all in increasing trust in government?
I'll answer that question first. The city, I think it can be a nuanced idea, because the city auditor is often bringing a critical perspective to the program under audit. That can be seen as contributing to negative perceptions of government or kicking government when it's down. I think that in order to increase trust and public trust in the government, there needs to be transparency, and there needs to be objective data on which the auditor is basing their conclusions. That means providing data to verify the government's claims when it's saying that things are working well or not working, and certainly give credit where it's due based on objective and high quality evidence when we can show that programs are functioning as intended.
Great, thank you. Brian, same question for you. Do you think that audits, critical audits are contributing to any kind of declining trust in government? And what, as auditor, should the office be doing to help increase trust?
Well, to help increase trust is to increase transparency and accountability, and to make sure in the belief that the auditor is playing fairly and is unbiased. And but like I say, there's times when there's going to be critical audits, and it's our job as a city to address the situations that are brought up. Like Simone said, it just goes with the territory. If things aren't working and we have data to support that, then the audit's going to reflect that.
Great, thank you.
The decisions is, they're not my personal opinion whether something's working or not working. it's really data driven.
Great, thank you. I think I'm set on questions. Does anyone else have any questions they want to jump in with? No?
I'm good, thank you.
I think I'm good too.
Great, thank you. If you like, I can give you each a minute to wrap up. Simone, why don't you go first on this, since I think Brian started it off.
Sure. I'll be brief this time. I believe I'm the best person for this job because I have a comprehensive set of skills to select the right areas to audit, and also to perform or form productive working relationships with both city officials and residents. I have a proven knowledge of government auditing standards to do this work independently, and that's independence with a little I. Independence from the audited programs and initiatives so that users can really trust in the auditor's work. And I'm also at the peak of my auditing career. I've been doing the work of government accountability and transparency for nearly a decade. I've been leading innovations in the field of government auditing, and I'm really ready to lead Portland through its toughest challenges.
Great, thank you. Brian, any closing thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'll be brief as well. I just, as I started off saying, I think Portland's on the wrong track. I think Portland's had a 35-year track record of one municipal auditor after another coming up and taking over this seat. And I think it's important that at this time, for this oversight position, we have somebody who's independent of the establishment and bringing a new set of views in here. It's disappointing that Simone had campaign finance problems and issues already in this race. It isn't that difficult to comply, and I just believe I'm the best candidate at this time to help lead the auditor's office and to set a slightly different agenda for what's been going on and to help get Portland back on track.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you both very much. I appreciate your time.